If 50 righteous people are found within the city, will you spare it? If I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the entire city for their sake.
Okay, so here's something that genuinely broke my brain when I finally put these two stories side by side. Sodom had Abraham, one of the greatest men of faith who ever lived, personally negotiating with God on its behalf. Standing in front of God going, okay, what if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Would you spare it then? What about 45? What about 40? Talking God all the way down to 10. 10 righteous people and I'll spare the whole city. That's the deal God agreed to. They couldn't find 10. Sodom burned. Now Nineveh. Nineveh gets one prophet. One. And not even a prophet who wanted to be there. A prophet who literally ran in the opposite direction the moment God gave him the assignment. He got swallowed by a fish, sat inside it for 3 days, and only showed up to Nineveh because every single other option had completely run out. Jonah walks into the most violent city on earth, opens his mouth, says 8 words, and the whole city repents. The whole city. And here's the part that nobody is talking about. Jesus brings this up at judgment. Not as a feel-good story, not as an example of God's mercy in general. He brings Nineveh up as evidence against people who had more than Nineveh ever had and still didn't move. We need to get into this because this is not the Jonah story you grew up hearing. First, you need to understand what Nineveh actually was, because most people hear wicked city and picture something vague, and that is not what this was. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, and Assyria was not just a powerful empire. Assyria was the most deliberately terrifying nation on earth at this point in history. These were not just conquerors, they were artists of cruelty. They would skin their enemies alive and hang the skins on city walls, not to hide it, to display it as a message to the next city thinking about resisting. They kept records of this, carved it into their own walls as celebration art, proud of every detail. This is Nineveh, and God tells Jonah, go there, preach to them. And Jonah's response is to immediately book a boat ticket in the exact opposite direction. And honestly, I understand him completely. Like, I'm not even judging Jonah right now. You want me to walk into the city that literally displays human skins and tell them God is watching? No, thank you. I also have places to be. I also have things going on. Nineveh was not on my list. But here's the thing about running from God that Jonah was about to discover in the most uncomfortable way possible. So, Jonah gets on a boat heading to Tarshish, the furthest point from Nineveh that existed on the map at that time. Maximum distance, full commitment to the escape plan. God sends a storm. Not a light rain, the kind of storm that makes professional sailors panic. Men who have spent their entire lives on water, who have seen everything. And this storm has them throwing cargo overboard and praying to every god they know simultaneously. And Jonah is below deck, asleep. The boat is being thrown around, sailors are screaming, cargo is going into the ocean. Everyone on board is convinced they are about to die, and the man who caused all of this is below deck, taking a nap. The captain finds him and basically shakes him awake, going, "How are you sleeping right now? Get up and pray to your God because we are all dying up here." Jonah comes up, looks at the situation, and tells them to throw him into the water. Not let me pray, not give me a minute, just throw me overboard. That'll fix it. And here's what gets me about this moment. These sailors, pagan men who don't know Jonah's God at all, actually try not to throw him in. They don't want his blood on their hands. They row harder first. They pray more. They try everything else before they finally run out of options and throw him overboard. Storm stops immediately. And those sailors who had nothing to do with Israel or Jonah's God, who just wanted to survive their shift and go home, saw what happened when Jonah hit the water. The Bible says they feared God greatly and made vows and offered sacrifices to him. Random pagan sailors converted on a boat before Jonah even got anywhere near Nineveh. God's reach is something I genuinely cannot explain. So Jonah goes into the water, and a great fish swallows him whole. And I need us to actually sit with this for a second, because we say swallowed by a fish like it's a minor plot point, and it is not a minor plot point. 3 days inside a living animal, in complete darkness, in digestive fluid, unable to move, unable to see anything, just darkness and whatever sounds a fish makes from the inside. I don't even want to think about the smell. I cannot imagine what 3 days inside a fish does to a person's hair alone. And in all of that, Jonah prays, and God tells the fish to spit him out on dry land. The fish obeys, immediately, without argument, without running in the opposite direction first. A fish does what God says instantly, while the actual prophet took a whole ocean detour to get here. I'm just noting that, not saying anything, just noting it. So Jonah gets deposited on dry land, covered in whatever you get covered in after 3 days inside a fish, and God says, go to Nineveh. Same assignment, same city, same message. Jonah just smells significantly worse now and has completely run out of alternatives. So, he goes. Now here's where it gets wild, and this is the part I genuinely cannot believe nobody slows down long enough to explain properly. Nineveh is enormous. The Bible says it takes 3 days to walk across it. This is not a small town with a town square. This is a massive, sprawling capital city full of the most violent people on earth. Jonah walks in one single day into this 3-day city and delivers his sermon. And here's what the sermon actually was, because I want you to hear it clearly. 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. 8 words. That's it. That's the whole sermon. Actually, wait, I need to make this even worse. In the original Hebrew text, that sermon is not 8 words, it is 5 words. 5 Hebrew words is the entire message God sends to the most violent city on earth. 5. I don't know what Jonah's face looked like when he delivered it, but I imagine it was the face of a man doing the absolute bare minimum legally required of him, while actively hoping it wouldn't work. No explanation of who God is, no list of their sins, no theology, no breakdown of what they need to do differently, no altar call, no gentle invitation to consider their ways. 5 Hebrew words from a man who didn't want to be there, who still smelled like fish, who had spent 3 days inside an animal getting to this moment, who had zero passion for these people, and would later go sit outside the city specifically hoping they'd still get destroyed anyway after repenting. 5 words, delivered with the energy of someone reading the terms and conditions on a phone update they just want to get past. And the entire city of Nineveh repents. Now let me show you why this is genuinely extraordinary by putting it next to Sodom properly, because this is the comparison that nobody is making the right way. Sodom had Abraham going to bat for it. Not a reluctant stranger, not someone passing through on a bad day. Abraham, the man God called his friend, the father of faith, a man with a direct personal relationship with God who used it boldly and without apology. Abraham stands before God and negotiates personally for Sodom's survival. 50 righteous people, 45, 40, 30, 20, all the way down to 10. 10 people, and I'll spare the whole city. And Sodom, which had righteous people living inside it according to the very negotiation Abraham was having, couldn't produce 10 visible enough to count. Sodom burned. Nineveh got Jonah, a man who tried to escape this assignment by boat, who was only here because a fish deposited him, who had no interest in their survival, who delivered the most reluctant 5 words in the history of preaching and immediately went to sit on a hill hoping they'd still get destroyed anyway after repenting. Sodom had the greatest intercessor who ever lived. Nineveh had a runaway prophet who hated them. And Nineveh is still standing. So what was actually different? Because it wasn't the messenger, it wasn't the length of the sermon, it wasn't access to righteous people or history with God or quality of the warning. One city responded. One city didn't. That's the whole difference. But here's the specific detail inside Nineveh's response that changes everything, and this is what I want you to actually sit with. When the king of Nineveh hears what Jonah said, he doesn't call a committee meeting, doesn't ask for a longer explanation, doesn't request Jonah's credentials or his track record or references from previous cities he's preached to. He gets off his throne, takes off his royal robes, puts on sackcloth, sits in ashes. The king of the most feared empire on earth, the man whose army built pyramids out of human heads, in ashes, on the ground, in public. And then he issues a decree. And this decree has a detail in it that I cannot move past, no matter how many times I read it. He says, let people and animals fast and wear sackcloth. The animals. He puts sackcloth on the animals. I need someone to explain to me the logistics of this situation. Who was assigned to the livestock department? How do you tell a cow it's fasting today for spiritual purposes? What does a goat in sackcloth look like? Did the animals get a briefing, or did they just wake up one morning in rough fabric, genuinely confused about their life choices? I think about this more than is reasonable for an adult person. But here's the thing that matters even more than the sackcloth animals, and this is the detail that almost nobody stops on. Listen to what the king actually says when he issues this decree, because he doesn't make a bold declaration. He says, who knows? God may turn and relent. Who knows? That is not confidence. That is not even faith in the traditional sense. That is a man who has no theological background, no history with this God, no track record to point to, no guarantee of any outcome, looking at 5 words from a fish-smelling stranger and going, I genuinely don't know what this God does, but maybe if we respond, something changes. And here's what God does with who knows maybe from a pagan king who had never worshipped him before. He relents. He sees what they did. He sees the king in the ashes. He sees the city respond. He sees the animals in their sackcloth doing whatever fasting animals do. And he changes the verdict. God responded to who knows maybe from a king with 0 theological background more than he responded to silence from a city that had righteous people actually living inside it. Now here's why that happens. And I want you to stay with me here, because this, where Nineveh stops being an ancient story and starts being your life right now. There's a documented pattern in human behavior called a social cascade, and it explains exactly what happened in Nineveh in a way that I think is the real lesson of this whole story. A social cascade is when one person makes a visible public decision, and that visibility gives everyone around them permission to do the same thing. Not convinces them, not forces them, just creates permission. Shows them that someone went first, that the move is survivable, that it's actually possible to do. Before the king moved publicly, nobody in Nineveh moved. The moment the king got off his throne and sat in ashes in front of everyone, the whole city followed. He didn't process this privately. He didn't have a quiet internal moment of reflection that nobody saw. He made his response as visible and as undeniable as physically possible. And that visibility is exactly what triggered the cascade that saved the city. Now look at Sodom. Lot was there. Righteous people were apparently present according to Abraham's negotiation that went all the way down to 10, but nobody's visible response ever created a cascade. Nobody moved publicly enough for others to follow, and the city never moved, and it burned. Same God watching both cities. Nineveh had one king willing to go first in the most public way imaginable. That's the difference. And here's why this should actually bother you in a personal way. Because the bystander effect, the thing that kept Sodom frozen, is not an ancient city problem. It's a documented human brain problem. When you're surrounded by other people who aren't moving, your brain reads that stillness as information. It goes, if something required a response, someone else would have already responded. Nobody's moving, so maybe nothing needs to be done. That mechanism is in your brain right now. The same thing that kept Sodom frozen keeps people frozen today, waiting for someone else to go first, assuming someone more qualified will respond, deciding that if it was really that serious, someone would have already done something. Nineveh's king broke that mechanism in his entire city by simply refusing to wait.
Okay, now here's where this whole thing lands. And this is the part Jesus points to in Matthew 12 that I want you to hear properly. Jesus is standing in front of a crowd, people who have the scriptures, the temple, generations of prophets, the whole history of God working among their ancestors, and Jesus himself standing right there in front of them, doing miracles they cannot explain. And he says, the people of Nineveh will stand up at judgment and condemn this generation. Not shame them, condemn them. Because Nineveh had nothing. No Bible, no temple, no history with God, no prophets living among them, no access to any of the things that were supposed to make responding to God easier. They had 5 words of a reluctant stranger who smells like fish, and they moved everything. So at the final judgment, Nineveh stands up, and their existence becomes the evidence against anyone who waited for better conditions, a more convenient time, a more impressive messenger, a more detailed explanation. Nineveh didn't get any of that. They got 5 words, a king willing to sit in ashes in public, a who knows, maybe.
That turned out to be enough, and they are still standing. So the question this whole story leaves you with is not about Nineveh. It's not even about Sodom. The warning has already come for you in some form. It didn't arrive from a fish-smelling prophet walking through your city. It came in whatever form God uses to get your specific attention. And you know what form that was. You don't need me to tell you. The king of Nineveh had no guarantee it would work. He had no promise of survival. He had no theological framework for what he was doing. He just had 5 words and a decision about whether he was going to respond visibly or wait silently and see what happened. He chose visibly. Who knows? Maybe. And God called that enough.